This is my 2008 Saturn Sky Redline manual transmission. I'm in the process of removing the transmission to address an issue, downshifting from fifth and then getting into either third or fourth where the shift lever is just resisting. Read online that it could be a interference after some wear gets into the transmission with the shift rods and the reverse lockout. Also one other item in a forum with something on the third, fourth gear shaft. So I'll post that in the comments after I get this all said and done. So to get to this point, I just got the drive shaft out. I wanted to provide some instruction in case it helps somebody where I was struggling. So I'm using the PDF of the shop manual. It's been a decent guide. I was just struggling with actually getting the drive shaft out after doing everything else. So I didn't really find any tricks. The manual pretty much has it all. I started up top, removing the intake down to the throttle body. I needed to do that so I can get the starter out and to some of the transmission bolts. So the starter's lying right here. There's the two guards down below. The third one is back there. Those are all underneath the car around the transmission and drive shaft. Catalytic converter looks like this. I did have to take the oxygen sensor out to actually get it out of the car. The oxygen sensor is laying here. And the bracket that holds the lower end of the catalytic converter had to come out also to be able to remove it. Once that was out, I got to the back of the car and had to do a number of things to get the rear end to drop down to gain clearance to pull the drive shaft out. So the manual does tell you to completely remove the exhaust. I've got it hanging from just a bungee cord, and I was getting to the point where the output shaft on the driver's side was hitting the exhaust and starting to resist. So I pulled out the forward rubber mounts on both sides. So it's still hanging by the rear, and it's just about touching, or actually is touching the bumper, but it's not really a whole lot of force. And then I also got to the point where the rear sway bar or anti-roll bar was being contacted by the axle. So I completely, it's basically ready to come out of the car, but it's locked in there by the geometry. So it's just all unbolted but lying on both ends. So at that point, the mounting bolt for the rear end is up here, and I've got these fully extracted. They won't come out because of the muffler. Here's the mount. So it had to come down a good 4 inches. And where I'm at to be able to release the drive shaft, I was down lower and the drive shaft was still pinching. I got it down to where it dropped just below the subframe. It's actually touching on the passenger side right here, but it's basically at the bottom of this cross tie. And the front transmission brace is also unbolted. And I was having a fight getting enough clearance right here at the CV joint to drop out the bottom. And what I ultimately had to do was work this up and down. And then ultimately in the end, I was so close but couldn't get it out. I took a 2x4 and a hammer and started hammering the rear end backward. And that got me just enough clearance to drop the seal cap out past here and get that to the ground. So I could see it dropping down here. I could see the body almost ready to come out, and that's when I picked up the hammer and the 2x4 to start getting like another 1/8 inch of the rear end back, another 1/8 inch to get clearance. And once that dropped out, I had to wiggle back and forth a bit because there's a pin that goes in here from the rear end, a pilot, and just had to carefully wiggle that and not hang down on it too far or do any kind of bending because I had to come off of that shaft, which is about 1.75 say 1.25" engagement. So, been some cussing, mainly on the sway bar, surprisingly, the rear sway bar. I rounded out the hexes, and I'm gonna have to find some parts for that. Other than that, everything loosened up fairly easy. So at this point, I am going to run the rear end back up and bolt that so it's supported, so I can remove my vertical support. And then I'll also run the bolts back here into the transmission temporarily so I can remove this support, lower the car, get it on jack stands, and then hopefully get the transmission out without too much of a struggle. So I'm hoping that might help some people out there with a Solstice or Sky that might have the same predicament, that were just looking just for some kind of help in a YouTube video, because I was finding kind of a minimal set of videos out there. Any questions, post them in the comments and I'll try to help.